The J. Everyone believes that I am a human bulldog. They equate the way I grip onto things to a bulldog's fangs around its throat because I'm extremely straightforward. I refuse to give up or let go. I carry out every action through to the conclusion. Many people believe that me being prepared makes me the luckiest guy in the world. I try to be as prepared as I can be for whatever I do so that it ends well for me. I like to think of myself as a wolf in a bulldog's skin since I look at situations from every perspective to find any flaws in the company or individual. Research is really valuable. Never undervalue it. I consider all of my options, both personally and professionally, before deciding on a course of action. It's among the several factors contributing to my business's success. When dealing with a new supplier or client, I do my research and never accept anything at face value. Although they might appear to be in excellent standing, further investigation may reveal that they are now going through a contentious divorce that could jeopardize their business, or they may have filed for bankruptcy 3 years ago in a different state. Some might have relationships with questionable people who could badly affect their business, which would then affect mine, or they might be involved in affairs and not be very discreet. To put it mildly, you could call me a legal loan shark, but really, I'm more like a venture capitalist. Throughout my life, I have amassed a small amount of money, which I have increased significantly by making prudent investments with individuals I have a great deal of faith in. I'm not perfect. While there are instances when things don't work out, I can accept a loss and go on because my success ratio is roughly 80%. Frequently, it's a teaching moment that helps me better understand the next transaction. I have a wide range of interests and responsibilities. A friend of mine who had multiple degrees in physical therapy and sports medicine was an incredible trainer. Despite her exceptional skill set, she lacked any commercial acumen. She asked me about starting her own company, so I did my typical obsessive research and made her go along with it. I put her up after we decided it was a good opportunity after she quickly gained a lot of knowledge about her field. I started out as a 60% owner but wasn't really involved in the business side of things. Every contract I signed included a normal buyout clause that allowed the minority owner to buy me out over a period of 5 to 10 years. The contract also states that in the event that the company begins to falter, I will intervene, review the data, and determine whether to assume control of the company or close it down. That was something I had to do 3 times, and each time I saw it as an insult to me personally. Early on, I had made an investment in a very successful advertising agency. Some powerful people approached them with the intention of buying them out and hiring them for their company. I was called by Bob and Jan to assist, and we discussed the offer. It was appealing, but I told them that in 15 years, as their name spread, they might outgrow the firm that was attempting to acquire them. I've made a lot of money from it over the years, but they turned down my offer. Through the structured buyout program we had agreed upon, I still control 20% of them, and in 4 years, they will be totally independent. Usually, I relied on my prior relationships to assist my more recent investments succeed. After Bob created a well-planned marketing campaign for Jody's rehabilitation clinic, she franchised in 2 years and now has locations throughout the Midwest and all of the southern states. She insisted that it made her feel safer, so I own a small portion of each. The person who first led me along this route was a seasoned hustler who preferred to go unnoticed. He most likely paid about 20% of the taxes he actually owed during his lifetime and got away with it. I wasn't really that bold, and I made very clear-cut, honest deals. In addition, the introduction of computers made it far more difficult to evade taxes. Great Uncle Harry shunned technology like the plague because of it. In my town, there had been a controversy at an accounting firm. They appear to have taken advantage of others, making a $12 million profit, while no one was around to witness them handle other people's money. After being discovered, the owners were imprisoned. The funds were never located. I purchased the company for a song since it caught my attention. It didn't benefit the old owners because they were in a financial crunch to pay their attorneys. I gradually grew the company, keeping 3 of the younger accountants who weren't participating. Their primary function involved ensuring that the businesses I had invested in were operating ethically and offering professional guidance when required, usually in reference to myself. It was beginning to show a very respectable rise in revenue stream after I changed the name, and the guys I had were good, managing to get approximately 25% of their old clients who hadn't been stolen from back. I made the 3 originals an offer of a buyout, which they enthusiastically accepted, 6% annually for 10 years. They still had 7 years to live. I was 32 years old at the time, and I was content with all but one part of my life. I felt alone myself. I went on a lot of dates, but I never did find the one. After they got divorced, Harry's wife had raped him because she was tired of his numerous affairs. It seems she was far more knowledgeable about his business than he had realized. The IRS showed up when she was done with him. I was the only thing that kept him out of jail. It was a close call, but he was assessed fines and taxes totaling about $24,000. They would have spared him with 3 years of probation if he could pull that off. I lent him the money since he had it but was unable to provide an explanation for its source. That made me the target of scrutiny, but my openness paid dividends. As one of my warehouse managers, Harry was repaying me at a predetermined percentage from his income, plus double the amount that was paid under the table. By the time the probationary period ended, he would have paid me off. Even though my great-aunt was acting out of hurt and rage, it helped me understand how important it is to be upfront with my future spouse, should I find someone worth marrying. Prenuptial agreements were mandatory, and I would ensure that there were severe consequences for any adultery committed by one partner. I discussed the matter with my lawyer as well, and he provided me with the general framework, leaving the specifics to be sorted out at a later date. I was pretty much alone in the world growing up as the only child of parents who never had any close family relationships. It gave me a strong desire to have a big family. If one of the 3 kids came along with the mother, that would be an added bonus for me. 3 kids was all I wanted. I was financially stable, handsome, and young enough to make the date special. In my life, I had been in 2 rather serious relationships. One was going well, and when I told her about the prenuptial agreement she would have to sign, she started to hint at a commitment. We were in love and would be together forever, she objected. When that proved ineffective, she became an epic shrew. We simply drifted away over time. 6 months afterward, she tied the knot with a young, well-to-do businessman. After a span of 6 months, they found themselves in divorce court, with her attempting to extract every last penny from him. She was only partially successful in obtaining nearly all of his possessions, but the family's money was secured in a trust and she was unable to access it. Until I intervened, he was about to lose his tiny companionship. After 3 years, he has significantly increased his net worth compared to his former marriage, become engaged to a kind young woman who had a child from a previous relationship and who seemed to love him more than her mother, and they were house shopping. I arranged it with one of my 2 interest-holding real estate offices. During the same period, his first wife was married twice more and divorced each time, barely making any money from the unions. One day I encountered her at lunch, and she told me I was to blame for everything. I simply smiled. "I'm not the cause of all your problems, honey. Just the big ones. All the rest is on you." Of course, it was all BS, but she bought into it. Update: I withdrew from my search for love because I was getting frustrated. I ran into love in the advertising agency corridor. She was a waif, and I was a pretty big guy. When I met her, she was 90 pounds and 5 feet even, I found out later. I assisted her up and then apologized and introduced myself while ogling her legs. "Hi, I'm Roy. A pleasure to run into you." She bit back the angry reply that was about to come out of her mouth and gave me a closer look. She sighed as I gave her my best "I mean you no harm" smile. "I should watch where I'm going." "Sorry, no harm done. Are you all right?" "As good as one can get when they bounce off a stone wall." "Let me guess, you work out a lot." Thanks to Jody, I had to confess I was in pretty decent shape. She planned out my meals and workouts, and she would scowl at me if I strayed from the path. However, I had a weakness for specialty beers. The majority were awful because brewers committed the most frequent error, assuming that beer with a higher alcohol content was superior. Many of them worked it out and survived, but some did not. My favorite brewer offered me some samples of his home brewing, and I funded his startup. At first, he was a little scared, but we helped him. His funds were handled by accountants, and he also had billboards, advertisements in state and local magazines, and an advertising campaign that went viral. Although his output could not match his demand, he was subject to severe limitations as a consequence of the influential lobbying efforts of the big boys. A few even attempted to pass off a portion of their goods as microbrews, but they were immediately exposed. He gave a lot of thought to my opinions because I was in his focus group. I gave her a smile. "A little. I wouldn't classify myself as stone." She stroked her buttocks absently. The phrase "knocked on her" ceased to be only a phrase. It truly felt that way to me. "Even if meeting you is interesting, I have to return to work." After our parting, I was curious about her work there, and Jan informed me that she was a new associate, recently graduated from college with a master's degree in boundless energy. When we finally got around to exchanging names, we couldn't help but chuckle. Her name was Jimmy Chu, and mine was Roy McCoy. Not related, she assured me, and I don't think his shoes are worth the price. I saw her a few more times when I had to go to the office. I was over 6 feet tall and pretty thick, thanks to Jody, and she was a tiny little oriental beauty over a foot shorter. We had coffee twice, a few lunches, and then a real date. We got a few looks from other diners at the really nice restaurant I'd taken her to. I never told her I'd bankrolled the restaurant and it was doing very well. She told me there was a lot of resentment between the two, going all the way prior to World War II, because of the many atrocities the Japanese had inflicted on the Koreans, and that's what prompted her parents to come to North America. Jimmy was raised mostly in Canada and had only moved there 4 years prior. You could still hear the Canadian influence in the way she pronounced certain words, which was kind of cute. Jimmy was half Korean and half Japanese, and in my opinion, inherited the best physical traits from both. I could see she was intrigued when I told her my background. I was born and raised in the area, attended community college for a year before dropping out, and received the seed money to launch my business from a bequest from a great-grandmother I had no idea existed. You have to be extremely intelligent. I smiled. Not really. I just got some good advice from a really successful man. He told me you didn't have to be the smartest man in the room. You just had to be smart enough to figure out who was and harness their intelligence. Most geniuses aren't very business savvy. That's where I fit in. You must be very successful. I reflected on my past mistakes. I then made her cry with stories of some of my failures. Sometimes, there's been a few times when I've fallen, but I consider each failure a learning experience. You really thought that was a good idea. Not now, but at the time I thought it made sense. We spent a pleasant evening getting to know one another better. I went her to see a local amateur theater group play after the lunch. They were doing the Rocky Horror Picture Show on stage, and they were fairly good. When Dr. Frank Infurter asked Brad if he had tattoos, one of the audience plants exclaimed, "Jerks don't have tattoos," to keep things interesting. At other points, the plants called the actor who played Brad a jerk. The actor turned to face the crowd and smiled. Jimmy burst up laughing, giving herself hiccups. Mine does. At the meet and greet following the performance, I spoke with everyone as a sponsor, and Jimmy struck up discussions with all of the actors. The actress who portrayed Janet approached her while still wearing a bra and a half slip. At that moment, her spouse Jack showed up at her side, still wearing his jockeys. In the play, he had the role of Brad. The moment I noticed Jimmy's gaze drop to his groin, I smiled. Say what you will about Jack not having to stuff his shorts. Celeste twitched, and I realized he had taken hold of her. After a late night and 2 bottles of wine, they told me they were adventurous and didn't mind playing with discreet partners. They had been married for 5 years and were loyal to one another. Celeste was staring at me with lust, but what really frightened me was that her husband was staring at my crotch with the same glitter in his eye. Not long after, I departed. Her bra flew past me as I got to the door. I didn't look back. Jimmy requested me to stay in the hallway for a moment after I brought her home. She was wearing a robe and standing on a step stool when she called me in. To my surprise, I discovered later that we were precisely the same height when we were horizontal. Because of her size, I attempted to be nice, but she wouldn't have it. "I won't break, baby, but I'd like you to try." I threw her around like a rag doll after that, putting her in one position after another until she cried out and fainted. I paused, unsure of what to do. After a few seconds, she realized what was going on and resumed as if we had never stopped. When we were done, she fell asleep right away, lying on top of me and purring with joy. We were then linked at the hip. After 3 months, she moved in with me. After that, she wore my ring for 6 months. I gave her the first present I had for her birthday, a 4-inch heeled pair of Jimmy shoes. Jimmy told me I had wasted my money, but I tried them on anyhow, and he smiled. Ouch, there's something in the toe of this one. A ring dropped out when she shook it into her hand. She merely gazed at it for a brief while. Then she asked, "Is this?" looking at me. I was on my knee at that point. Considering how little she was, she had a fair amount of strength. When she launched herself into my arms, it knocked me down. She had the ring on her finger when I finally got us off the floor, as I noted. Update. The next June, we tied the knot with just the right amount of fanfare and ceremony in front of our loved ones, honeymooned in a warm location with few clothes on, and became content in our home. I was genuinely content. Jimmy took great pride in her work, which she excelled at, while I struggled along as usual. When the major owner of a security company saw his wife playing around, he handled it poorly, and I lost a lot of money. Ruined penis for the lover, wife's chronic limp, and 5 years of being treated like a state guest. I was able to obtain it at a significant savings since he required all the funds he could raise to settle with his former partner and legal fees. Had he been married earlier, she would have taken over the company. I found a retired Army inspector who had worked as a CID inspector for 15 years to run it. The fact that there wasn't much real detective work shocked me. He put up a team of highly skilled techies in the era of digitalization, thus much of their work needed very little physical labor. Nevertheless, he trained them all, and they were flawless. Who is going to think that a laptop-wielding geek is dangerous? When I worked with them to set it up, I became really paranoid. Not to mention cameras. If you had any kind of digital presence at all, you were doomed. Only 3 of the original staff members remained after all the adjustments had been made. The majority of their work was for corporations. I asked them to undertake a comprehensive review of every business I was involved with. When I showed Jimmy the prenuptial agreement, she was not pleased. We nearly postponed our marriage over it until my attorney and hers came to an agreement. I had to add 5% a year to a trust that I had invested $250,000 in. She would get the money, and that would be it if my infidelity caused the marriage to fail. With the exception of my business, she would walk away with little more than what we jointly accrued if she was discovered to be cheating. In the end, it felt more like a business deal than a marriage, but I knew that neither of us would cheat, so it was simply a bunch of lines on paper that we would eventually forget about. It seems that I was mistaken. Update. It was a little over 4 years since our marriage. I considered my life to be good. We both had healthy, active lifestyles and solid social networks. I was introduced to whitewater kayaking by a cousin. Jimmy went a few of times, then told me it wasn't for her and to proceed with caution. My cousin made the point very clearly. You can't breathe water, and you're not unbreakable. You push the boundaries every time we go out, trying to shoot rapids that, to be honest, are a little too risky and require portaging. Water is categorized for a purpose, and you don't have to go out by yourself. You never know what you'll get up to when there aren't any cooler heads around. You continue to take foolish risks, and I will no longer go out with you. I don't want to be the one to inform Jimmy that you perished while doing a risky activity. Jimmy became enthralled with the shows of the local theater guild. We acquired season passes and frequently invited friends to see something a little different. Along with my company, Jimmy and I individually were patrons, as were 3 of the companies I was affiliated with. Growing up, I spent my summers working in construction, frequently assisting with set construction. Jimmy arrived and helped out by painting, sanding, and doing anything she could. A few hours prior to the start of a brand new show, an actress made a phone call. She was in the hospital after being involved in an accident, undergoing treatment for her broken leg. Just as the director was about to lose his cool, he glanced at Jimmy. There are only 2 lines and hardly much movement. Please assist me with this. The first night, she was utterly terrified. It was evident from the expression on her face. She was hooked by the time the last performance's curtains came down. Everyone thought she was a natural, and as she gained practice, her abilities grew to the point where she frequently played second lead roles. She seemed to enjoy it, so I didn't mind that it required a lot more time than I had anticipated. A lot. When I eventually told her how much I missed our time together, she started to cut back, missing around 1 out of every 3 shows. Many of the performers were close friends with her, and they frequently visited our house. Jack and Celeste grew close, and even though they were cautious to respect boundaries, they were flirtatious and suggestive when we were by ourselves. We still spent a naked night in the hot tub together despite that. The mood was set with 4 bottles of wine and nearly non-stop chatter throughout the evening. Completed, emerging from the water and tossing a startled Jimmy over my shoulder. When I turned to leave, they had a fantastic view of her. As long as you'd want, stay. Jimmy and I have tasks to complete. After we entered the kitchen, I left her on the counter. As soon as it reached the ideal height, we started acting like savage beasts. Using the attention as an advantage, Jimmy slid off the counter, circling around it and wriggling herself. Though a touch tipsy, we smiled at each other when we woke up. With a distant expression on her face, Jimmy sat drinking her coffee. It was intriguing last night. I have never before witnessed live time. Wasn't that a scorching day? Yes, it was. However, I believe it will be some time before we welcome them back to the hot tub. They'll see it as an opportunity to go outside their comfort zone since I know them. I'll say something to reaffirm my position on sleeping outside of marriage. We'll play if you like to participate. Just be ready to move out as soon as possible. You realize there's no turning back from it. Jimmy appeared to be waking up from a dream at first. Obviously, my dear, that didn't need to be said. Nevertheless, wasn't it entertaining to watch and be watched? It was, but once more, I don't think we should do it again. What actually occurred was a case of heat of the moment and too much wine. She nodded, but there was a hint of disappointment in her eyes. Update: a few weeks after the Theater Guild conference, Jimmy returned home beaming. I got the lead. I gave her a big embrace and kiss since I could tell she was excited. You're going to rock it. Celeste needs to keep an eye on her. She laughed. Jack and Philip are taking care of that. Well, that's good for them. They seem like a good couple, but I can't help but feel that if they push things too far, it will end badly for them. One or the other will take a risk that they simply cannot recover from. They are completely enamored. Although it doesn't align with our way of life, they seem to find it works for them, and they tell me it keeps things interesting in the bedroom. I smiled at her gushing manner. Not rethinking this whole monogamy thing, are you? She smiled and flushed. Never. I'm happy with what we already have. Actually, let's enter the bedroom so I can remind you of it. One problem. What's that, honey? The bedroom's too far away. Before she could respond, I was on her. I may have been a touch too excited when I took off her underwear, but I made up for it the next day by going to the upscale lingerie store in my neighborhood. That place was in operation before Vicky's identity was even known, and their selection was so good that it made the national chain look bad. The grandma-like woman who looked after us gave Jimmy a tour of the fetish area and could scarcely contain her excitement as she showed her the floggers. It was hilarious and nearly made me laugh out loud. We were having a great time and had even begun discussing having kids. Jimmy didn't have any siblings either, and her number of kids fluctuated from 3 to 4 every day. Whatever number she chose, I was game. I was working on another project. Poor management caused our favorite restaurant to close. The chef approached me with a suggestion. We would purchase the closed restaurant, complete with furnishings, undertake some minor renovation, hire excellent personnel to assist in the cooking, and appoint a skilled host or hostess to oversee the dining area. I had made an early investment in a restaurant and made a respectable profit. It folded about a year after I left. It went south quickly with no one to manage the money or rein in the chef's inflated ego. I refused his call to reinvest when he tried to do so. He had already tarnished the place's reputation too much to return. Since restaurants generally have a terrible failure rate, my accountants were adamantly against it this time. The chef passed the security personnel's scrutiny with flying colors and an impeccable reputation. Because his wife didn't want to move, he had already turned down 2 rich employment offers, and from what I could tell, he was taking his idea to 2 more investment groups. I ultimately made the decision to go ahead. If it didn't work out, I could write most of it off, but deep down I thought it would. I got the song's business. The owner is attempting to make ends meet so he doesn't have to file for bankruptcy. I own 60% of it, with the chef contributing his reputation and a small amount of money to make up the other 40%. As usual, I included a buyout clause in the contract that would pay 5% annually after 2 years. The refurbishment turned out much better than we had anticipated and was completed on schedule and within budget thanks to the real estate company's introduction to some excellent builders. Perhaps it was time to investigate the construction industry. Jimmy created a fantastic marketing strategy that went viral, and our first night of business was completely booked. The diners were chosen at random via an online lottery for the complimentary meal. A few tables were set aside for food journalists and critics. They were given a taste of some of the best delicacies, and word of mouth and the articles were fantastic. I deliberately went to the event. Our guests were Jack and Celeste, mostly because Celeste was a food blogger. They invited their friend Philip along, and I felt that he was overly self-assured and arrogant about his acting career. He had been in a few regional commercials, small roles in regionally produced movies, and a 6-week stint as a guest star on a daytime soap opera. He just couldn't figure out why he wasn't receiving calls from Hollywood. That's so, he came across as innocent and even mildly humorous. I had the thought that perhaps stand-up comedy wasn't his true calling. Cynthia, the primary director and member of the board, was his date. She was clearly infatuated and about 10 years older than Philip. She was also extremely married to an unforgiving man. I pondered if he was aware of her location. She was familiar with me and, more significantly, my morals. I'm really happy Celeste asked me to step in so Philip wouldn't be the fifth wheel when she called. I was going through mental hurdles since Jim had been gone for a week and I wouldn't be going home for another 4 days. Going out with pals is a great idea. I thought it smelled like snake oil, but she was selling. I was not buying it, but I didn't give a damn. It's not my concern, but Philip would no longer be trying out for leading man parts if my suspicions were correct and Jim ever found out. Because of his altered features, he would fall into the category of the quirky sidekick, deserving of every scolding he received. Celeste smiled as she turned to face me. She was aware of my thoughts. She lived her life honestly and by her own standards, so I had nothing to judge. We'd become better friends than Jack and I would ever be. With the exception of Philip's contribution, the food was delicious and the conversation was outstanding. Celeste would purposefully say things that he didn't understand, then smile when he made mistakes. It was entertaining, but cruel. Cynthia would have had Celeste on the ground if appearances could kill. Jimmy appeared to be disturbed by it as well, despite her best efforts to hide it. I couldn't help but wonder how long it took him to finally remember his lines. Following an exquisite dessert accompanied by exceptionally rich coffee, Jack and Philip proposed that we visit a club in order to burn off some of the excess calories. I am unable to. Remember that I have to stay and push the flesh. If I left Gene with the wolves, he would cry. He is an excellent chef, but he lacks networking skills. We are addressing that. Celeste concurred. I also have to stay here. I need to speak with the chef and find out what the patrons think. I then have to return the next day to capture candid pictures of the diners and to take pictures of a few of the dishes. Though I intended to enjoy the lunch from the perspective of a consumer, I would have done it tonight. Is it okay if we move forward? When you're through, you guys can catch up with us. Philip grinned and Celeste scowled at Jack. Jimmy added his voice. Are you okay with that? In this manner, I can clear the path for all the quick ones, and once you arrive, we can continue to push each other until we are unable to handle it any longer. As we watched them leave, Celeste turned to face me and touched my arm. You'll be all right, Roy. Nothing will take place. I simply smiled. Honey, who are you attempting to comfort? Who is it, myself or you? She let out a sigh. Jack has recently been pushing the boundaries a little. I was beginning to worry even though I felt like we were extremely in tune with each other and our connection. Life of yours, Celeste. Get it out in the open if you're bothered by it and you want my opinion. Aside from your lifestyle, I believe you're a wonderful woman and Jack is foolish if he endanger your bond. He may be quickly replaced by you, but he will never find another person quite like you. She embraced me tightly as tears welled up in her eyes. She smiled at me as she straightened up. I'm going to monitor Jimmy like a hawk, waiting for her to make a mistake if everything comes apart and I'm a free agent. I'll be all over you if that ever happens, but it won't. And for as long as you had me, Roy, it would just be you. I gave her a cheek kiss and assured her that she would always be my first choice. We worked till we had completed our tasks. When we got to the club, Jack and Philip looked like they had just finished a marathon. Jimmy and Cynthia remained on the floor, savagely grating on one another. I had never seen her like that, so I was astounded. She turned around, spotted me, and screamed happily. She ran into my arms and kissed me fiercely, almost toppling me. Hey, come on, please. She adjusted to the height difference as best she could as a slow song began to play. Throughout, she maintained a direct gaze on me. She had me completely enthralled by the time the song ended. She held my hand while she sat while Celeste got up to dance. Hold him off, sweetie. He will need to dance with the blogger if he hopes to get a positive review. Jimmy laughed and pulled me in close. After approximately a minute of dancing, the music shifted to a mellow tune. Celeste quickly wrapped her arms around me and rested her head on my shoulder. This continued for a few minutes, at which point she raised her head and scowled. Jimmy didn't appear to be fighting Jack very hard, even though he had her all over the floor. She pushed Jimmy into my arms after dancing us over. Honey, don't be a fool. Take a dance with your spouse. She sees Jack, and their relationship didn't appear to be pleasant. Refresh. When the song ended, we walked out. Celeste and Jack seemed to be fighting, and Cynthia was attempting to stomp Philip from the ground. Jimmy slept when I parked the car, and he was calm the whole ride home. Though I considered leaving her in the car, love won out over rage, so I cuddled up to her and put her to bed in a childlike manner. I tried watching Curiosity Stream till I passed out in my recliner because I was too excited to sleep. At 6:30 a.m., I realized I couldn't sleep anymore, so I made myself some coffee and had a shower. Jimmy sneaked into the kitchen 2 hours later and took a cup. After a while of sitting, she timidly said, "Did I do anything stupid last night?" Define stupid. Permit me to clarify. Was there anything I did that might have strained our relationship? I scowled as I composed my response. Not really, but you were so near the line that even a tiny prod would have been enough to get you over it. More than a somewhat improper behavior, at least once. I won't be around for very long if you stay in the marriage, so let me know right now if you want to end it. I was astonished by her response. Pale as ever, she puked all over the kitchen table. After tidying the table and pushing Jimmy into the shower, we both showered and she went back to bed. She stayed asleep till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. She was shocked to see me wearing a suit. Remember, I have to return to the restaurant. Celeste is stopping by to complete the images she needs for her blog post. I don't think you're capable of accompanying me, even though you were meant to. I should return no later than 8. I passed her without giving her an opportunity to argue before turning away. Since this was his official opening, Gene was anxious. The cuisine was a little more constrained yesterday, and admission was by invitation only. He had a complete menu this time and was fully booked by 10 that morning. I moved aside to allow Celeste to follow waiters, prep workers, and cooks around the chaotic kitchen. She returned to my table an hour later, moaning as she took a seat. She gave me a smile. Honey, you still have your touch. You're going to find another gold mine here. I sipped my coffee and felt at ease. The local barista insisted we have a machine that was well worth the weight of gold. I smiled in return. Hopefully, this is only the beginning. We will be launching 2 new locations in Atlanta and Jacksonville early in the next year. In 3 years, if they go well, we'll be across the country and in Canada. The advertising experts are working on everything from television exposure to personal appearances, cookbooks, tie-ins, and the complete package. Gene could have to relinquish his position as chef before too long. She widened her eyes and then grinned. Don't you always take the long route? I've always thought your investment decisions were arbitrary. It was several years before I realized there was a method to your insanity. How many amenities does Jody now possess? 19, and 2 more on tap before the end of the year. And you own a chunk of all of them. I could not help but smile. Yes, quite little, yet quite lucrative pieces. Got anything else up your sleeve? I have a few more opportunities in mind. Things that I prefer not to talk about until they're finalized. Her smile grew larger. I'm sure I'll read about it in the paper. Then she shifted her focus. Want to talk about last night? A tiny bit. Jimmy and I haven't spoken yet. I find myself wondering, what would we have discovered if we had returned an hour later? Celeste grasped my hand. Refrain from passing judgment. I'm sure Jimmy adores you. I believe her judgment was impaired because she had a little too much to drink. Furthermore, you observed her happiness upon our arrival. She was right, I had to concede that, but I didn't think that cleared Jimmy entirely. I sipped the last of my coffee. I'm about to head home. We'll listen to her response. When I arrived home, Jimmy was all over me, apologizing profusely. At last, I managed to calm her down. I am aware of your inebriation. I'm not too bothered by that. The fact that you became inebriated with 2 jerks does worry me. A married woman was Philip's main target, and Jack will sabotage anything that moves. He's the kind that would view your inebriation as a chance. I need your assurance that this won't happen again. Do you get it? She vowed that it would never occur again on behalf of our unborn children. We went to bed, and I gently shut her down when she touched me. Honey, you're still not at 100%. With a sigh, she nestled close to me. Promise, promise. The following night, we did perform, and Jimmy gave it her all. She cut back on her alcohol consumption significantly during the few months that followed when we went out. She would only get somewhat inebriated when it was just the 2 of us, and she trusted that I would look after her. Jimmy was an ordinary person, but she elevated herself to a whole new level when she had a little drink. She promised me it wouldn't happen again, and I assume it played a significant role in her behavior that evening. Refresh. The staging of a live performance requires a great deal of work. If the show was a fantasy or period work, there were constant costume fittings and modest rewrites to accommodate the player's abilities. The guild was excited until showtime with the addition of sound checks, lighting modification, blocking of spots on stage that were hidden from the audience, prop staging, and backdrop preparation done quickly. I had no time to volunteer because I was so busy with a few of projects. I had to alter my itinerary because they all insisted that I attend the opening under threat of death. When I showed Jimmy the t-shirt I had prepared to wear to the premiere, she gave me a crazy smile. The image featured her in a seductive pose, with the slogan, "I'm married to a thespian." Celeste met me at the door of the theater, appearing quite apprehensive. She did not participate in the play. She was dedicating a lot of time to her blog because it had become popular. The food sector was the main source of her increased sponsorship. She began doing remotes from organic farms, large meat processing facilities, and local dairies, and then tracked the food from the fields to the consumers at restaurants, grocery shops, and farmers markets. After receiving assistance from my advertising team, she was able to start designing a show that we intended to submit to PBS and other networks. My latest endeavor was setting up a video studio. After Celeste gave me an introduction, I met with the management team and took a tour of the facility. Their needs were open and obvious. We need to grow because we're doing so well. Unfortunately, the banks refuse to finance the expansion because we have used up all of our credit. We don't have much business experience, but we can make amazing videos and short films. Celeste believes that we may be incredibly helpful to one another. I was pleased with what I saw after doing my research. The two proprietors were investing all of their personal funds into a brief animated movie that had a lot of potential. Regretfully, they were declining business due to insufficient resources. Ultimately, I acquired a 60% share in their company, clearing off outstanding debt and providing them with the capital they required to grow. They surprised me by asking me to wait 2 years before we discussed the buyout clause I had always offered. That will buy us some time to find someone to handle the business end. I wasn't really sure what executive producer meant, but if Celeste got her show, that's what I was going to be. I kissed her cheek and smiled. She and Jack weren't getting along well, and she was under a lot of stress trying to start her program. He seems not to even miss me. It's been a while since we've played together, let alone with anyone else. It seems as though he is indifferent to my presence. That made me really concerned. He was the epitome of a horn dog. I felt sorry for her if he wasn't receiving it at home. Neither Jimmy nor I are spending the necessary quality time together. She's either working or preoccupied with rehearsals when I'm away from her. I'm going to ask her to take a moment to focus on us alone. Traveling is almost over, and I want to go over the kids' chat again. When they arrive, I want to be able to chase them around since I'm 36. Celeste grinned pitifully. She and Jack had made the decision early on not to have kids. She refused to have her tubes tied even though he'd been cut. I thought that by saying great news, I could make her feel better. The Food Network called and requested a meeting with us, and PBS and Home and Garden Network expressed interest as well. You seem to be destined for stardom, my dear. She grinned, but not in the way I had anticipated. I did not get to explain that PBS leaned more toward restaurants, but Home and Garden wanted a different show that focused on farms and the food sector. She may choose to perform 2 shows, combining genres when appropriate. Look, Roy, I have to get you ready. The episode, which is about adultery, had a scene in the bedroom where the cheaters were sharing their first bed together. I battled to have it removed, and I believed I had succeeded, until Cynthia just informed me that she had placed it back in. Please keep in mind that everyone is acting in this play. I could tell from the way she spoke that this was not going to be a fun experience. Update: I was more than right. The play was masterfully constructed, allowing the audience to follow the tension and the waning of resolve. In a couple situations, the messages flashed up on an 8-foot screen behind the guy and lady while they were texting from opposite sides of a darkened stage. Subsequently, their covert lunches, intimate touches, and intensified kissing intensified. Philip, the main guy, got along well with Jimmy. It seemed to come easily to him, so I had to question how difficult it was for him. They consummated their romance in the last scene. The spotlight landed on a king-sized bed in the center of the room while a cheap hotel sign flashed at the end of the stage. Different sides of the bed were used by the participants to enter. Philip donned a masculine thong, typical of his conceit. I doubt that his size impressed any of the women in the audience. On stage, Jimmy strode. They were wrong to anticipate a thunderclap of applause. A few gasps were followed by a brief period of stillness, and then a few hesitant customers cheered. Celeste gripped my hand tightly and wouldn't release it. When the lights went out, it was difficult for those who knew me to look at me. I gave Celeste a quick glance. You can let me go now. She squeezed on even harder. Slow down. Roy, please. It was only a play. It has no significance. Did you see what I saw, too? Celeste, let me go. I reached down and gently took her little finger, bending it backwards until she had to let go or risk breaking it. She attempted to hang on. With a gasp, she eventually released her grip, and I turned to move toward the reception area where the players actively engaged with the guests. Jimmy, still in her gown, was standing between Philip and Jack, beaming broadly. The women were either ignoring her or were staring at her with hardly hidden disdain. The men merely gazed. I stepped in front of them, and they were gloating over Jack's direction. Jimmy's smile vanished when she saw my expression. Get some goddamn clothes on. Philip and Jack watched as she hurried backstage. Smirking, they were each trying to outdo the band. Your wife is one hot. My fist colliding with Philip's jaw swallowed whatever more he was about to say. Thanks to Jody, I was huge, angry, and pretty strong, and I blew him away. Jack spun around to flee, but I caught him by the long hair and pulled him back. You're a jerk. Do you really think I'd stand here and take this garbage? The smile returned. Jerk, it doesn't matter what you stand motionless for. Jimmy was totally on board, especially considering the additional rehearsal time we invested to ensure it was believable. He went to the floor with Philip. As everyone stood there in horror, I locked onto 2 members of the board of directors. You gave your okay to this garbage. Ignore you all. On Monday, a letter informing the board that I, along with any associated companies, amending my patronage will be sent to you. They were astonished by that. Together, my businesses and my own patronage came to almost 40% of their total expenditure. They would have to work quickly to find new customers or risk the season ending. As they attempted to contain the damage by claiming that the bedroom scene had not been included in the practice they had seen, Cynthia barged in and began to scream uncontrollably. It was an act. You caveman, none of it was real. So, it was just a make-believe version of my wife prancing around and exchanging spit. She became pale. Celeste stood up and extended a gentle hand. Please, Roy, relax. I rejected her handshake. I mistook you for a buddy. You could have offered me a heads up so I could clean up this mess. However, you didn't. Don't you believe Jack is making fun of her? It appears that Jack is ready to go alone and leave your place. Upon noticing the horrified expression on her face, I halted. The public was unaware of their lifestyle, and I came dangerously close to outing them, even though it was a fairly open secret within the guild. Sorry, see. That was all I was able to say before a large woman tackled me to the ground. She had to weigh roughly 250 pounds and be at least 6 feet tall. I doubted it was fat, based on how she felt when she helped me to the ground. Philip, it found out, was married. The night had become such a disaster. She gave me a few pops, and I can assure you that she didn't hit like a chick. She and I were handcuffed by the time the police arrived. Philip and Jack were being monitored by the EMTs. I gave Philip a hairline fracture to his jaw, so it looked like he wouldn't be getting any speaking parts for long, but Jack ended up with just a fat lip. They needed 60 minutes to resolve all the issues. Since Philip was an outsider and I was a local who helped the police whenever I could, I was given the benefit of the doubt. They managed to get his wife to promise not to file charges if I let her to continue attacking me. Celeste had gone, standing by Jack while she let the tears fall slowly down her cheeks. Out of the whole awful mess, she was the only one for whom I felt sorry. When Jimmy had initially shown there in a robe, she had surveyed the situation and scurried off, returning later in a t-shirt and trousers. She still had on her dramatic makeup, and she looked awful. I believe that comparing raccoons to her would have insulted them. As soon as the handcuffs were taken off, I yanked off my shirt, spat on it, and hurled it to the ground, looking her in the eyes. I didn't see her again until the following day when she cried and rushed out of the hall. Update: it was very late at night, and it was Walmart, so I didn't look too good going into the all-night Walmart wearing only a suit jacket and pants. They've undoubtedly seen worse. I took off with some socks, underwear, jeans, and a few shirts. I crashed at a motel in the next town over because I had no intention of going home. I put my phone on silent mode to stop it from ringing and didn't check it again until the middle of the following day. Jimmy called 30 times, Celeste called twice, Philip's wife curiously called once, and 5 different board members called. I heard a couple of them from Jimmy. They fulfilled my expectations. It was only a play. Nothing had occurred. I needed to go home so she could explain things to me since I was exaggerating them. I paid close attention, but I never once heard her express regret for her actions. I erased the remaining 8 and stopped. Every member of the board expressed the same opinion. It was only a play. They were unaware that the scene in the bedroom had been changed. They were barred from the rest of the season, Jack and Philip. Someone had requested Cynthia to step down. I might give them the benefit of the doubt because it sounded like they were attempting to make things right. It was fascinating, the one from the jerk's wife. Look, I'm not sure who has to apologize in this situation. It wasn't right to hit him so forcefully. I was wrong to leap on you. Although I don't believe anything happened, if you have evidence, please share it with me. While I acknowledge that the bedroom scene was extremely offensive, I believe that your wife was caught in the middle between Jack and my husband. That won't provide a difficulty going forward. I've informed him unequivocally that he's done with the guild and that he needs to find a real job if he can't make a good living performing in the next 6 months. He joined the guild merely to increase his visibility a little. At least one of the group looked to have some personality, though. I gave you a call back, and we spoke for quite a while. We weren't precisely enemies, but we also weren't best friends. Speaking with Celeste was a little trickier. I spoke before she could respond, giving me the upper hand in our conversation. Hey, I apologize for last night. I might have overreacted because I was so agitated. You own your lifestyle, so long as it doesn't interfere with mine. I really like you, honey, but you need to make some decisions that I don't think will ultimately involve Jack. He'll most likely have another big lip when I see him again in the near future. Although I would prefer not to be removed from your life, I will understand if it is necessary." There was silence until my breath ran out. Then she got going. "Roy, you wounded me. Throughout our whole friendship, you have never made any overt remarks disparaging my way of life. Jack has a tendency to be a jerk and occasionally overreact. Never should he have added the scene from the bedroom back in. I have a suspicion that he did it to annoy you. Roy, you're threatening him. You're far more accomplished and intelligent than he is." I couldn't hold back my laughter. "I'm not that big, honey, and I don't mean to offend you. Jack is not so little. Just so you know, if we ever got together, I would never screw you. I would give you the kind of love you deserve. If we kept going, we would eventually sleep together down the road. I have no doubt that it would be absolutely amazing." Her flush was almost palpable. "Honey, I have to go right now. When you wish to discuss the show alternatives, give me a call later." At least one bridge was repaired, though. That was not the case with Jimmy. I didn't give her an opportunity to talk when I called her. "The residence. It is 6 o'clock. You had best be honest and not tell lies. We're done the moment I catch you, therefore I'm going out the door. The prenuptial agreement goes into effect if I find out that you were playing me. I'll be unforgiving." None. When I arrived, she was seated on the couch. The fact that she wasn't drinking pleased me. To get through this, we'd both need to have a clear head. "Honey, I extended my hand. "I'd like to speak first and ask some questions, if you don't mind." I had no doubt that she had developed a strategy and had everything figured out for how to deliver it, given how well organized and analytical she was. It bothers spin doctors to be placed in a reactive capacity. This action of mine tossed the script to the wind. "Who picked the play you were presenting?" "Jack did, but when you read it, especially the bedroom scene at the end, did you feel it was appropriate for a small-town audience?" Now she felt a little agitated. "Jack said it would do the town good, get them out of their comfort zone and broaden their horizons. And you agreed." "Not at first, but Jack and Philip said." Words from the fount of knowledge and morality. Jimmy was shining now. "May I make a statement?" "Yes, it was utterly unjustifiable and really foolish. Since then, the Guild has received a number of phone calls, but none of them have been complimentary. 17 season ticket holders have so far asked for a refund of their money. 2 additional business sponsors have withdrawn their funding. The extinction of local theater could be imminent. You'll excuse me if I can't work up a lot of empathy for them. Please, Roy. You enjoyed the theater, but you don't have to forgive Jack, Philip, or even me. Prior to destroying them, give it some thought. They might not return at all. Although I didn't care at the time, she was right. Did you screw them? No. Did you give it any thought? Have your rehearsals ever gotten a little crazy? Tell me, looking directly into my eyes, that nothing improper occurred. Above all, explain to me why you felt that performing virtually nude on stage and going straight to the curtain call without any clothing would be acceptable to you." She was crying a lot, so I waited for her to calm down before trying to console her. "Jack didn't let me know that the bedroom scene was back in until right before the curtain rose. He and Philip gave me the nightgown and assured me that they would turn down the lights before I went on, so no one would see it. I was forced onto the platform by Jack without any other option. I understand. The play has to continue. I would like to ask you this, why didn't you tell them to screw themselves and refuse to do it when he indicated the bedroom scenario was back on? You had the option to duck back when Jack shoved you. You know what I believe. I believe you were a little horny and aroused, so you thought, why not? Even though you knew it would make me seem bad and aggravate me to no end. Even so, I might have forgiven it if you had dressed in a robe for the mixer and curtain call. Did any of that come from you? You didn't, for crying out loud. You virtually strutted out there with nothing on." I paused, exhausted. "Jimmy, I believe we're done here." She let out a primal scream and threw herself at me, sobbing and pleading simultaneously. All I did was hold her till she fainted. I sat with her for a long time, feeling her tuck her closer to me and never let go. Was I still in love with her? Indeed, I did. Did I really think I could move past her actions? Perhaps. She woke up the following morning smelling of coffee. She came in with her silky black hair in a tangled mess and was wearing one of my old t-shirts when I was at the table. I've never seen her look more gorgeous. She picked up a cup and began to speak. She spent the better part of the morning talking, and a lot came out. She was terrified of becoming a mother. Because of her jealousy of Celeste, Jack took advantage of her feelings and told her that he would be pleased to repay her for sleeping with his wife. Philip had chimed in, complimenting her on her good looks and stating that she deserved more. Although she acknowledged there was a lot of roaming hands, she insisted there had never been any bonding between them. Her statement that she had always wondered if today was the day I understood I was married to a little foreign half-breed astounded me. Ever since we fell in love, she remarked. Update. Returning was a long road. Jimmy saw a different therapist independently while the rest of us attended therapy sessions. Ultimately, considering her worldview and her fall into the hands of a few successful predators, I could kind of understand how it could have occurred, but I still believed that common reason and her love for me would have prevailed. Naturally, the Theater Guild was on the verge of disintegrating. The final 3 plays of the season were cancelled, therefore there were no more performances. Cynthia ended her marriage. Philip was named in an alienation of affection suit, and it was fairly ugly. He had nothing to lose, and Cynthia's husband promised to dismiss the accusations provided he admitted to having slept with Cynthia. He threw her under the bus and sang like a canary, even bringing up a few situations with their friend Jack, because he was such a gentleman. After becoming extremely ashamed and tired of her husband's infidelity, Anne filed for divorce from Philip. He was unemployed and had the audacity to seek for help. When his attorney brought it up, the judge they had laughed at laughed. "Mr. Lawson, you have some experience and a degree. Given how competitive the employment market is right now, I'm sure you'll succeed." Refused motion. It was over a year before Celeste and the newly elected board of directors of the former theater guild paid me a visit. I would have begged them to kiss my behind if Celeste hadn't asked me directly. There were a lot of promises made concerning control of the staff and material, and they nearly urged me to accept a place on the board, but I wasn't one to hold grudges. I was especially drawn to Celeste, so I agreed and helped prepare it for a new season that focused primarily on children's plays. In one of them, I even had a role as the cow in the kids' rendition of Into the Woods. The local critics stated I stole every scene I was in, and I had a blast. That was the extent of my dramatic endeavors, though, as employment at the time was rather taxing. After Celeste was appointed artistic director, she carefully selected and oversaw most of the productions. She was pleased by it. Celeste made several months of attempts before giving up and divorcing Jack. She had to threaten to obtain a restraining order if he didn't leave her alone because he wasn't handling it well. Due to business, Jimmy and I spent a lot of time together, and we did our best to comfort her. Jimmy and I used to travel together on projects, especially when Celeste was involved, and I urged that we spend more time together. I believe it was a combination of curiosity about how television operated and jealousy. My comment: can you accept your wife doing such a thing? And what would you say to her? Part 2 ending coming tomorrow. Sub and bell and check out the recent uploads. And I will finish the ending and you will find out what happened to Jimmy.